Hello and welcome to the programme. Tonight we look at the housing crisis and in particular at the problem of supply, which all observers agree is crucial. Lack of supply is driving up prices and in turn driving up rents, which some claim is a key factor in the growing problem of homelessness. So how can we increase the supply of housing to make it affordable, reduce the pressure on the rental sector and make sure that families have permanent dwellings? Later the Minister responsible will be debating with his critics. But first, Richard Downs reports.
Housing, Ireland's Achilles heel. We either have too much and it brings catastrophe, or too little and it threatens our recovery.
To turn the tap off was very easy. Turning it back on is much harder.
Prices have to go up or the costs have to come down.
The demand is evident in not so much rising house prices but in rising rents.
Swords in North County Dublin. It's growing and it's already larger than Drogheda. In 10 years, it'll have a bigger population than Limerick City. And it's here that developer Brian McKeown owns a large tract of development land in an area where many young people are keen to set up home.
We're currently building 56 apartments in 2 blocks, 28 in each block, and we're on site since May. And we hope to have them ready for the rental market in April of next year. Currently, it wouldn't stack up for us to sell because the prices aren't strong enough. Current 2-bed prices in Swords are anywhere between 130 and 160,000. I can't construct it for that, so there'll be no margin. So we know what we'll get in a rent, we know what it'll cost to build, to fit out. So that model is working. Will work for us.
And yet people are crying out, it appears, for starter homes.
They are, and we have starter homes up the other end of our site at the moment. We're just finished them. But unfortunately, as I say, the central bank rules since they came in have had a major impact, particularly the 3.5 times the salary. It's having a huge impact. People are really struggling and sales are not happening as they should be.
All of which means that Brian McKeown won't be breaking ground on any other new developments anytime soon.
We currently have a phase that we got planning permission for. Now, ordinarily I should be starting that. It's for 3 beds and 4 beds and a few 5 beds. But why should I start building when I can't sell what I've already built and it's costing me money? There's no point in doing that.
The builders want the government to put pressure on the central bank to relax the limits it introduced just a few short months ago. They believe the new rules have effectively capped mortgages for first-time buyers and forced potential purchasers into the rental market.
Well, the demand is evident in not so much rising house prices but in rising rents, because with the new central bank rules since February this year, an awful lot of people are going to either stay renting or have been forced into renting, and rents have risen quite a lot over the last few years. The average rent in Dublin City is now over €1,300. It's pushing €1,400 a month.
Over in Howth, it's a different story. This is one of the largest single development sites in the whole country by value. Here, NAMA is funding the Cosgrave organisation to build homes, and this time they are for sale. But this is the very top end of the market, €1.5 to €1.9 million, and 9 are already sold, which is all very fine for the well-heeled buyers, but not good news for the tens of thousands in need of modestly priced homes.
If you look back at the completions in Dublin from 1970 to the year 2000, Dublin was producing annually for every single one of those years between 5,000 and 10,000 a year. And obviously population back then was an awful lot smaller. Dublin has produced almost nothing for the last 5 years. And even at the moment, the numbers are way down on where they should be. So we do have a problem and it needs to be addressed.
No matter what your story is, it matters.
With increasing pressure for social and affordable homes and a clamour for new starter homes, the big issue is still the lack of supply. Across the country, there were 11,000 homes completed last year. Even at the most conservative estimate, that is more than 4,000 less than we needed. Because of new requirements, builders have to tell local authorities when they start building. And the picture for the immediate future that paints is pretty grim. Estimates based on these figures show that there may only be 10,000 new homes delivered this year, and maybe only 14,000 next. By the time we get to 2016, the supply could be 10,000 less than the demand. And the latest statistics show that where the homes are actually needed, they're not being planned. Of the 4,000 planning applications received in the second quarter of this year, there were more planning applications in Donegal than there were in Dublin City. More in the hard-hit Border and West than in the whole of the booming Greater Dublin area.
There's about a 2-year lag between demand and supply coming on stream. So even if every builder in Ireland got their shovels out tomorrow, it would still be in the middle of 2017, maybe 2018, given the lengthy delays in the planning process, before anybody would get the keys to their own house.
One of the many impediments to building is the legacy of the crash and the dozens of builders who went bust. Of those who survived, many are holed beneath the waterline, unable to fund projects. Even those that survived relatively intact find the Irish banks are unable or unwilling to fund developments, and as a result they really only have one option, and that is to get on the plane and go to London and talk to the hedge funds, and that can be a very expensive option.
The banks are extremely cagey now about lending for property development. You've got to go to equity funds or some other player then, and generally they're looking for money in the high teens. And with the delays that are happening in planning and some of the other delays with regard to infrastructure, if a house project or a housing project is delayed for 12 months and you have an extra 15 or 18 or 20% charge upon that, puts a massive cost on the end product.
This has opened up an opportunity for the State Pension Fund, now known as ISIF. Builders and developers will get a new opportunity at the end of this year because the pension fund, which is based in this building, is teaming up with an American hedge fund, and they're putting €500 million into the housing market. Now, they'll fund developments to the tune of 90%, but there's a catch, and there's always a catch. And this one is a big one. They'll charge 14% for the privilege of doing so. The company will be called Activate Finance, and it'll start lending in January.
If you or I had a few quid to invest at the moment, and you'd probably need to have more than $1 million before any bank would be interested, they'd offer you 0.2 or 0.3%. And yet, when we go to a government-backed agency, they're looking for 14%. So there's a dreadful gap there somewhere that I can't understand.
There have been calls for NAMA to get even more involved in the housing market. But given that they've already funded 43% of all home completions in Dublin so far this year, their room for manoeuvre may be limited. Never mind the fact that the State Pension Fund that's just about to start lending through Activate Finance is housed in the same building as NAMA. They're both arms of the state. But let's be clear, to increase supply, the builders say they need a tax cut. They want VAT to be reduced to 9%. They want a drop in development levies and quicker planning permissions.
36% of the cost of the house goes directly or indirectly to the Exchequer. And we've been making those plans to government as well. We feel that's too much at the moment, that the Exchequer would be better off if they took a less share and allowed extra activity.
But haven't we been here before? Pressure on the central bank to ease their rules, tax breaks for developers, lower levies. Isn't that what contributed to the land mania which caused our economic collapse?
Any tax breaks that you give to the development industry only gives them more money in which to bid up the price of land, which again, in turn, ultimately results in a higher residential sale price for houses.
But the industry believes that if tax breaks aren't given to developers, well then some help should be given to buyers.
I think what we're finding across most sites that we're selling, everything is selling, Richard. You know, the market is good, but stuff isn't flying out the door. And that, you might well say, is not a bad thing, and to a large extent that is true. But if you want to get large-scale construction, if you want to have 8,000 to 10,000 units a year built in Dublin and its environs, and obviously more than that in the country as a whole, you need to mobilise that number of people out there to be able to buy the product. And if you can't sell the product, it won't get built.
So at the moment, there's a shortage of new homes. Many that are coming to the market are for rent, because that makes sense for the builders. And a lot of supply in the Greater Dublin region is at the middle or top end of the market, because that's where the money is. Meanwhile, across the country, but especially in the east, thousands of jobs are being created and tens of thousands of new households are being formed, adding to the pressure for a solution to our new housing crisis.
Richard Downs reporting. I'm joined now in studio by Conor Skehan, Chair of the Housing Agency and the Planning Lecturer at DIT, and by Marian Finnegan, Chief Economist with the Sherry FitzGerald Group. Conor Skehan, if I could start with you, it's clear there that we have a serious problem with supply. Why do we have such a problem building houses all of a sudden?
I don't know how to begin this. The set of questions that were framed for us there are part of the problem themselves, the continuing dissemination of the idea that this is a solution to the builders' problems.
Well, what is the solution to the supply problem? Because there clearly is a problem with the
Ireland has a problem, which is that we are continuing to respond to the construction sector as if it's an industry that we need to feed. We need to provide affordable houses in the right place at the right time for our fellow citizens. And as Lorcan Sir said in your filmed pieces there, it takes about 3 to 4 years for housing to come on stream at the end of a recession. We've had a catastrophic recession caused by the same people that you're being interviewed by, that you're interviewing there, and this takes time to recover from. That's what we're seeing. It is the normal end of a recession, and these are the normal pressures that occur during this period.
OK, I think people would arguably accept that, but when they see a statistic like there being more planning permissions applied for in Donegal than in Dublin, clearly there's more of a problem here.
There sure is. The problem is that we've got a construction sector who are sitting on their hands saying we're not getting back into the market until you give us the kinds of prices and profits that we think we're entitled to. There's your problem.
Marian Finnegan, if I could throw that one over to you. You represent one of the largest auctioneering companies in the country. You would presumably argue that prices need to rise so builders get a return so they'll actually build, but a lot of people sitting at home might think that's just an excuse for giving developers more money.
No, and I wouldn't argue that to start with. I think what we need to look at it first of all is the need for housing, and we have had a very significant growth in our population over the last 6 or 7 years. Between 2006 and 2011 it grew by about 8%, and it's up about 50,000 on that last census figure. So with a population growing, you need to build more houses. Now, developers are in the business of building houses. If they're not doing so, there is a reason for that lack of construction activity. Volumes last year were incredibly low. They're going to be lower again this year. What the market requires is somewhere in the order of 20,000 houses to be built every year. We're lucky if we get half that way this year. And of that 10,000 units, half of that 10,000 units will be standalone properties where people are building houses for themselves. So scheme houses are only about 5,000.
But why is there a delay? Conor Skehan was suggesting builders are sitting on their hands.
No, I think what we're looking at is, yes, we're just coming out of a recession. You have to remember the recession for property only ended in 2012. But the delivery of property isn't a simple matter of turning on a tap, simply. We have delays in the planning process. Really, the viability of property has only turned a corner in 2014. And we have delays in demand. So the regulatory changes that were brought in earlier this year are good in terms of prudent lending policy, but they will delay demand. So that's going to delay first-time buyer demand in the marketplace. Investors are not particularly active at the moment for a variety of reasons, and they're another essential proportion of demand. So end-user demand is being delayed, and the cost of development is still quite high. And mix those two together, developers will be reluctant to deliver into a risky market.
What are you looking for?
I think there's not one, there's no silver bullet here, okay? There's a myriad of different elements that need to be looked at. We need to look at the whole planning process and ensure that that's sped up. We need to ensure that what is being delivered is what the market requires, not necessarily a textbook approach to what the market requires. We need to look at building regulations. We need to have a high standard of building regulations. We need to be able to build a myriad of different types of property, not just one single type.
OK, Conor Skehan, the developers say they need to dig out, if you pardon the phrase, to get them going again. Are they lying?
Could we please stop talking about what developers need and building?
Do you not accept that we need somebody to build houses?
We need homes for the people of Ireland who don't have homes. There are a lot more ways of providing homes than putting a brick on top of a brick. We've got very large levels of vacancies and very large levels of underutilisations of buildings. They will see us through the 24 to 36 months mentioned by Lorcan Sir in his taped piece that will take us to the period when normal building starts to happen again. That's what we need to concentrate on, and not to be sucked in to the development and building sector's language and terms of reference.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But at the same time, people who are looking for a house can't get one. People who are trying to rent are facing spiralling rents. People at the bottom of the rental market are being pushed out, are being made homeless.
Okay, you're conflating a number of different things there, and this is what part of the narrative problem is that people are using the dreadful fear and anxiety of people who have homelessness issues and people who have, there are people sitting there tonight who have negative equity. There are people sitting listening to us tonight who are knowing that they're only paying the interest on their loans. There are people with terrible problems out there that we have to worry about. And we're not to conflate those issues with the issues of trying to get a construction sector back to a series of unsustainable expectations of profitability. We're not in that business.
We are constantly talking to people and hearing from people who are having those problems.
We have people who want to have houses. We are in the middle of the recovery of building those houses. As Lorcan Sir says, it's 24 to 36 months to bring them back on stream. We have every single time come out of a recession, given into these types of pressures and put in place the type of pro-cyclical measures, tax breaks, incentives, pressure on the central bank to reduce lending rules that have started the set of processes that led to the bubble that have gotten us into the trouble we've been in the first place. We are not in the housing agency going to stand by silently and let that happen again.
Marian Finnegan, a lot of people hearing what some of the developers were saying in the film are going to say, oh, well, here we go again.
Yep.
But if you look at the stock of available property, let's just take that issue which was raised a moment ago. There are at the moment in Ireland 32,000 houses advertised for sale. Now last year we sold about 43 or 44,000, so we haven't even got a year's stock. And if you look at the quantity available in Dublin, there's about 5,500. We sold 14,000 last year. There simply is not enough stock available. Just a moment. If you look at the rental sector, at the moment there's about 1,750 rental properties available in Dublin. Typically you have about 5,000. If we had enough houses available, we would have a reasonable stock on the market. We don't. Okay. So we need to build to bring that stock on.
Okay, one final point.
We haven't got enough houses for sale. It's not that we don't have enough houses. You're being disingenuous. The transaction levels are at an all-time low. The government have the fiscal instruments available to incentivise people to start to put their houses back on the market.
One final point to you, Conor Skean. Developers say they can't make enough of a return on houses, and that's why they don't build. Are they telling the truth?
Because they have paid insane prices for land in the past, and they're trying to recover those insane prices in the present.
OK, Conor Skean, Marian Finnegan, thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. Marian.
Thanks, David. What is clear, Minister, is that the market simply isn't working. What are you doing as a government to make sure that you can fix this?
Well, first of all, can I say we need to look at the context, and you're right, the market is dysfunctional to a large degree, and we've just heard the last debate where I suppose we've come through a period where banks are bust, where there isn't access to credit for builders, and where land historically has been bought at very high prices. And this is all feeding into a model of housing that we need to get away from. We need to get back to sustainable level of housing. Now, I listen
You're
to
the Minister,
I
so
am
what
indeed,
are you going to
and
do?
I'm going to tell you some actions that we've already taken. The first thing we've done is we've allocated the housing agency to identify and research the supply and demand, and are now making an annual statement of where housing demand is and the type of units that are now required. We don't need the large-scale bedrooms, 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom units that we see that's for sale. We need 1- and 2-bedroom units to meet the demand that's going to arise. We've introduced new legislation, Miriam, to reduce the cost in construction. We've literally halved the social housing obligation that developers will have to pay. I didn't hear them welcoming that. And also we've retrospectively allowed them to reduce development charges on 21,000 units that have planning permission
but Minister,
tonight as we speak.
How are you going to increase the supply right now? We watched Richard Down's film there. I mean, there's more planning applications in Donegal than in the wider Dublin area. What are you doing to increase supply?
There's a multifaceted approach. First of all, can I say NAMA, who is often criticised, they have produced 43% of the housing stock in Dublin already this year. And we'll be looking at other ways where they can maximise that output. That's the first thing. The social housing strategy is committing funds for the first time in almost a generation now of €4 billion over the next 5 years that will increase output for social and affordable housing.
You heard Tom Parlin. He said this new scheme we have, Activate Finance, going to charge 14% interest. He said builders won't build at that rate.
Well, we need to be very careful. First of all, this is a new fund that has been set up to allow developers to apply for funding. This is actually the National Pension Reserve Fund. We cannot raid that. It has to be lent at commercial rates so that we can secure future pensions. It will work, providing that from the concept to the price of land to the margins that builders, designers and professionals are looking for. That has to be a fair margin, but it can't be excessive like it was in the past.
Is that a good idea, Barry? Can?
In theory, it's a good idea. In practice, it's proving quite ridiculous, to be quite honest. When you think the NTMA borrow on behalf of the government at 1%, when you think NAMA are lending to their clients at 4%, and when you think the government set up a fund along with an American hedge fund to try and help and allow builders access funds when banks are not giving out funds at this time, and they want to charge 14% and think that'll address the problem.
So what are you going to do? What's
your
idea?
I'm saying there's a huge emergency at play here that has been allowed to evolve over the last number of years because of the inaction that we've seen of governments sitting on their hands on this issue as well as many others.
Connor Skean just said it's not an emergency.
Well, I think it is, and I think Father McVerry says it's an emergency, Brother Kevin says it's an emergency, and everybody I meet in my constituencies on a regular basis who can't find housing,
what's the
where there's
plan?
130,000 people seeking housing, it has to be an emergency.
What's your plan?
It's three-pronged. You have to look at the rental situation where rents are soaring and people are being thrown out of their homes. The rent supplement has to be increased. The cap that's there at present, not only in Dublin but throughout the country, is fantasy land. You know, there has to be rent certainty. There's legislation to bring about rent certainty that can be reviewed every 3 months to deal with the emergency we have at hand. In relation to supply, you know, home development banks issued by government bonds should be lending at 4 to 5%, the same as NAMA, to allow people access
if you bring in
this.
rent certainty, more and more landlords will stop renting. So you just create a greater crisis.
No, they don't. If they give security of tenure to tenants, you know, they can get mortgage interest relief. They can get a reduction in relation to the allowance against property tax. You have to incentivise these people too. But at the moment, you have to increase the supply that's been mentioned. And Taoiseach has said it himself, despite the fact that he said money is not an issue, supply is the problem. But yet he's not funding local authorities to meet that supply. The private sector is starved of funding to decrease.
It will decrease the supply, the rent certainty and rent inflation. It will decrease supply.
No, it won't. It'll address an emergency that exists at present because the rent that's been charged is and the rent supplement is fantasy compared to what the situation is on the ground.
Why not bring in, Minister, a help to buy scheme like they have in the UK? That is apparently working.
Can I first of all address the Fianna Fáil policy, which I think, quite frankly, is very confusing. On the one hand, they're saying we need to increase rent supplement, which will essentially go into the hands of the landlords. And then on the other hand, they're saying that they want to bring in rent controls. That will drive the accidental landlords out of the market and to create further pressure on the housing stock.
Sorry to disappoint you. We didn't say anything about controls.
We must look, and the Fianna Fáil legacy here, in fact, Fianna Fáil had the Part 5 element where developers could buy out their social housing obligation. If that element wasn't there, we would have 10,000.
You've reduced Part 5 from 20% to 10% in the last number of weeks. You've reduced Part 5 in the last number of weeks to 10%.
I want to finish my point. I want to finish my point with due respect. Can I finish my point? If that Part 5 buyout wasn't in place, we would have 10,000 additional social housing in this country as we speak tonight. We have removed that in our legislation of July.
That's your point. Come back in.
Right, look. My job at hand as an opposition spokesperson is to hold this government to account, to highlight the inactivity that leads us in the position that we're in today. And if you want to compare
like with like... But you want to
talk about legacy. Talk about 2007 to 2010, when social housing output was 15,000 compared to 1,200 this time round in the last 3 years. There's you know how many houses have been built in Offaly at the moment since this government came into office? 8, and they're not complete yet.
Okay, we're talking tonight about supply. People are watching and they're desperate to buy. What about a help to buy scheme? Why not bring something like that in?
Look, the government are looking at a package of measures in front of the next budget in terms of how we can incentivise further supply in the market. But I think we have to be very careful. The response that Fianna Fáil are giving is very dangerous. They want essentially to bring in rent controls on one hand and on the other hand raid the National Pension Reserve Fund. That's essentially what they want to do.
Will you look at the tape?
It needs to be sustainable. It needs to be a normalised market. We can't afford to get back to the boom-bust cycles that we had in the past.
But you have to get some houses built.
Of course we do, and we're beginning to see it. We went from 6,000 to 11,000, but we need 21,000 houses or units per annum now at this stage.
Barkham.
It's unbelievable to hear, what we have at the moment is rent soaring, 130,000 applicants on the housing list, no housing supply, rent caps in fantasy land, central bank rules that are barring people entering the housing market itself, mortgage interest relief gone, banks not lending, landlords being taken to task by banks, people being forced out of their homes. And the supply market, the Taoiseach says it, has said it consistently, and you've heard Alan Kelly say his number one priority is addressing supply. You're not addressing supply. You're not accommodating the market to address supply.
All of the problems and the pressures you've just outlined are the consequences of the bust that we have inherited as a government, and that we're working to repair the economy first, to get people back to jobs so that they can lend again, and to repair the banking system that Fianna Fáil busted in the last number of years.
Minister Barkham, I'm not sure how much hope we gave to people trying to get and buy houses tonight, but we'll come back to it. Okay, David.